in this episode of the Critical Oxygen Podcast.
That might get you a completely different FTP across all those different types of workouts, but you're going to get good specific work in each one of those efforts. And I feel like that is the most important thing. It doesn't, yeah, you can brag which one's higher with your buddies, but in the grand scheme of things, it's still about you moving the needle and being better.
Welcome to the Critical Oxygen Podcast, where we help you optimize your physiology and maximize your endurance potential. I'm your host, Phil Batterson. I have a PhD in molecular exercise physiology, and I'm the founder of Critical Oxygen, where my mission is to build better endurance athletes through remote education and in-person physiological testing. Today, I'm joined by Coach Aaron Geiser. He's a continuing guest host on the Critical Oxygen Podcast, and he is a coach and an athlete for both half and full Ironman triathlons. Aaron is a wealth of knowledge in terms of the coaching and physiology space, and I just love talking to him because I get the chance to, talk to him about how to translate science and research into coaching practices, and he's really good at adapting those scientific principles to his coaching practices. So in today's episode, it's the start of season 2. Welcome everyone. Aaron and I are going to do a bunch of listener questions and answers. We touch on everything from how to train as you get older to whether or not fasted training is best for most adaptations. Spoiler alert, it probably won't surprise you, but we always take it back to what is the context of the athlete that you're coaching or the athlete that you are, and then how can you build the content up after that. So welcome to season 2. I really hope you guys enjoy the new introduction and other things like that. If there's any feedback you want to give me, please DM me, let me know. I'm always looking to make the show better and have it cater to you as the listener's needs. So without further ado, welcome back to Season 2 of the Critical Oxygen Podcast. I hope you guys enjoy the show. Aaron, welcome back to the show.
What's up, Phil? Season 2. I've made it a second season. I was invited back. Something went right.
Yeah, when we were going through the board of lists or the list of things of people to invite back, you just squeaked by. So I'm glad you could make it.
Sometimes it's nice to just inch by the line. You don't have to run past it or through it.
Nope.
As long as you just get past it, you're okay.
As long as you collapse and your head crosses the finish line, you still finish. No. All jokes aside, Aaron, I am so excited for you to continue to be, a co-host with me. We had an amazing time, actually. I don't think a lot of people know this, but I was down in Kentucky about a week ago doing a bunch of testing with you and your athletes, and it was super, super fun. And I think a lot of the athletes had a really, really good experience. So I think we're going to make one of the episodes coming up here, how and why a coach would want to hire somebody to do physiology testing and how you could actually use it for your athletes. Because I think that is something that not many athletes get to experience, but once they do, it's something that can, kind of change the way that they actually train. Because they feel like, oh, I'm like an elite level athlete or something right now. I got the mask on, I'm doing all this testing and all of that. So it's a cool experience.
Well, and it also might even be a good option to bring somebody, one of the athletes on and just give their kind of interpretation or feel of that testing experience as well.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that would be really, really cool. That would be super fun. I already have a couple in mind, so we'll coordinate with them, and then we'll be able to make that a new episode. Before we get into the Q&A and stuff, I do want to say, so Aaron's got a cold tub in his house, and it was something that he kept being like, hey Phil, you're gonna get in the cold tub, I'm like, no man, I'm already pretty cold. Like, I feel like I'm getting the benefits of being in a cold tub without being in it. So then the final day, I finally got in the cold tub, and I was only able to last about a minute and a half, and then Aaron,
was it that long?
I definitely made it to a minute and a half, and then I got out because I was shivering so hard. It was so cold. But then Aaron gets in and then makes a video while he's up to his neck in water explaining the benefits of ice bath immersion therapy, and He's not even shivering and wound up going for 7 minutes. So I've taken it upon myself to do an ice bath now every single night since I've gotten back. I've done an ice bath. I don't actually know what the temperature is. I just turn the water in my house to as cold as it possibly can be. Some days it's super cold because it's been like close to zero a few times. Other days it's like a little warmer, but it's still pretty darn cold. So I'm patting myself on the back here because I've been able to last for 5 minutes each time. But yesterday was the worst. Like, for some reason, I was already cold, and then I got in and just started shivering, and was just uncontrollably shivering the entire time. So it was the worst experience to date.
Well, sometimes those days do happen. It's just like, I guess, from a performance. Some days you just have bad days. But
Yeah.
I question if I get into yours, would I just start to sweat because it's
Probably.
a little bit more...
Yeah, you'd get out and you'd actually be warmer than when you got in. You're like, dude, that was like a sauna for me.
We've had some Ironman swims that were warmer than that.
Yeah. No, I'm working on. I have been toying with the idea of getting a thermometer for the bathtub just to see what the actual temperature is, because it's pretty cold, and the reason why I know that is because when I get out, I have like the ring of vasodilation all around my skin, so everything is like, that was immersed in the water is actually red. So that's my judge if it was actually cold enough or not. But the reason why I have decided to do it is because I went cross-country skiing the other day and got a little bit too excited going down a hill, wasn't able to turn correctly, and just wound up eating absolute shit going around a corner. And I was going really fast. So A, it was probably pretty funny to watch me wipe out, but B, I ate it so hard that I almost did the splits, and I think I, tweaked my hip a little bit, tweaked my knee a little bit. So I was like, okay, I need to take that inflammation down at the end of the day. And it, lo and behold, it does help a lot, or it did help a lot in the acute phase of things. But it's feeling better now. But that was the reason why I started it, and now I'm like, okay, I'm gonna keep going, just to see how things change over the course of a month or two doing this ice bath thing.
So are you starting the day or ending the day with it?
Ending the day. So I do kind of what you talked about. Is about 2 hours before bed, I'll do the ice bath. Then I'll get out. I'll just let my body temperature come back up to normal. And then typically I'll take like a warm shower before going to bed. And I think I was pretty tired a few days leading into it, but like it was like one of those things. It was just like Dramamine. Like I would be like sitting there and be like, well, it's time for bed. And then I just go lay down and I just pass out. So I have found that it's been helpful from that perspective. I'm not 100% confident in making that statement that it's actually improving my ability to fall asleep, but on some days I certainly did notice that it did help.
And that's a very similar reaction that I've seen to it. So I kind of followed that. I'm a morning person. I don't feel like I need to kick off my day with it, but it helps kind of end the day for me. Mm-hmm. And I do know some athletes that like to put it into that first portion of the day, and it seems to kickstart their day pretty positively. I just look at it from the different side of it, and it just kind of helps me kind of put the finishing touches on the day, I guess I would say.
Mm-hmm. And we'll have to do an episode on kind of cold water immersion as well, because there was a recent meta-analysis that came out that I'm sure people are going to be like, oh my goodness, like if you do all that cold immersion therapy, it's going to blunt your gains and other things like that. And I will say that, yes, absolutely. If you got into an ice bath immediately following your workout, it probably would blunt some of that inflammatory response, which would then blunt your gains. But I think at least stretching it out as long as you possibly can to the end of the day or the beginning of the day, I don't think it's going to have as much of an impact as immediately following a workout would.
Well, we just had the episode release, Context Over Content. And again, This is another one of those things where the context of what's going on is affected by the content. So it really... depending on what your gains are, what your goals are, there's going to be a way to utilize it. And in that case, I've even had some individuals on my Saturday ride on Zwift say, "Oh, I'm really excited to get into the cold bath right after this workout." I'm like, "No, don't. That's not probably the ideal point or time to put it into your routine." And of course, that stimulated the question of, well, why? And then you get to go into that response of, well, really what we're looking for in that initial acute phase of recovery are these factors. If it blunts that, then yes, you're gonna kind of stunt some of the growth or potential development that you've worked so hard to develop through that workout. So it is about inputting at the right point of the day, the right time of the day, and around some of the activities that you're doing. But again, just like anything, it's got to have a little bit more of a reason behind what the goals are to accomplish the task that you're looking to accomplish.
Yeah, 100% agree. We'll save a more nuanced discussion for future episodes. But yeah, we can actually let's dive into some of these question and answers. So for those of you who don't know, on Instagram, on my story every once in a while, I'll do a poll or a Q&A. And all you have to do in order to get your questions answered on the show is just respond in the box on the story. Or you can comment down below if you're on YouTube or anything like that, and we will eventually address those questions. So for those of you interested or having a lot of questions, it's a perfect place to start in terms of getting your questions answered on the show. These first three questions are actually more towards masters athletes. And I'm interested to get your take on this because I have my opinions. But so the first question is for masters athletes, how long would base training in zone 2 be? And would it be ideal to do them fasted? So basically what they're saying, right, is how long should their zone 2 training be, like time wise, and then should they do it in a fasted state? And does it matter if they're a masters athlete or not?
Well, as far as the base phase, I really do not see that adjusting too much for a master's athlete. I also, depending on the master's athlete's athletic background too, is also going to factor at that point of how quickly they're going to respond to certain types of training, especially base training, and that could also factor into the length of time that they're going to stay or need to be in that particular phase. So to answer that question, Phil, I really, it's about knowing the athlete, but it's not something where, well, because you're in the master classification, it's got to be 3 weeks longer. It's got to be 4 weeks longer. I typically just look at it as what is their background and then kind of work from there. If they've exposed themselves to a great deal of fitness or base building in the past, they're most likely going to adapt really, really well and really, really quickly to base training anyway. So continue to provide that. An athlete that has been more sedentary or has not been in the sport for as long is going to take a little bit longer, and that's going to be the same thing for an athlete that's a little bit younger in age. So I don't really classify either one of those as, I don't classify the masters as you got to go more, you got to go less, or it's still kind of fits into that same window for all other aged athletes. As far as the fasted, I think part of that answer is also going to depend on the rest of your day's nutrition, what you've done coming in. I want to make sure that aging athlete is getting enough protein in their diet. And
Absolutely.
We want to make sure that we're still getting enough calories through the course of the day. So still, we've talked about this in a couple of different styles, but it's all about getting your calories in. You're going to be more successful if you get calories in than if you don't get your calories in. So if that athlete's going into a particular workout fasted and gets them super behind on caloric intake, it's going to have more of a negative effect. So I'm going to recommend that athlete, we probably need to do, it doesn't necessarily have to be carbs. It doesn't need to be fat. It doesn't need to be, it just needs to be something of what you're used to consuming. There's definitely additional arguments to, should masters athletes take in more carbohydrates or take in higher protein or take in higher fats. There's a couple of different arguments to support each one of those comments, but the key piece in the end of the day, I would just want to make sure that athlete is taking in enough calories and not getting behind into a big caloric deficit, because that's ultimately what's going to have a negative effect on training, life, and rebuilding. Because yes, you are losing a little bit of muscle mass as you age, a lot of other factors that just take place in the course of aging. We want to make sure that we're fueling the body and feeding the body what it needs to try to maintain the muscle structure that it has and start to really develop that or incorporate that environment for recovery.
Yeah, to build off of that, aging individuals have less of a response to protein in terms of you don't get the same amount of muscle protein synthesis if you intake, say, 20 grams of protein immediately following a workout. So that number, actually, those protein recommendations are higher for individual masters athletes and higher, because it just takes more protein in order to trigger that muscle protein response. I'm sure with exercise, you're probably going to do a better job of triggering that muscle protein response, but just know that for some individuals, that might look like, as opposed to taking 20 to 25 grams of protein following a workout, it could be 40 to 50 grams of protein following a workout. And we do know that with masters athletes, or at least aging individuals, I can't say masters athletes because aren't some masters athletes still like in their 40s?
Yeah, consider, I raced something that I was in the masters category, and
yeah,
it's like, oh, okay, cool.
So I can't say, that this is going to, hold true for everybody, but as you age, you do have a tendency to see that muscle protein synthesis response drop off. So you have to make sure, and I think this is important for all endurance athletes, make sure you're intaking enough protein throughout your day, because muscle is what is going to be propelling you on the bike, in the swim, in the water, or on the run. So protecting that muscle as much as you can is super, super important. And then from a fasting perspective, this is kind of an idea of marginal gains. I think, you're going to make the stress of the workout larger by going through and doing it in a fasted state. But if that's at the expense of not eating enough calories throughout the day, then that's all going to be a wash, essentially, because you're not going to be replacing enough calories throughout the day in order to actually build. You're just going to be maintaining or getting back to where you were. So I typically don't recommend to people to do most exercise in a fasted state, just because of that reason, especially individuals who are training for longer races like a half Ironman, marathon, full Ironman, ultra endurance race, other things like that, because calories are key and super important. So you need to make sure that you're staying up on those, throughout the day.
And I think additional is taking into account how long the workout is, what is the session dynamic. These are both important factors of whether you need to fuel or not, or whether you're going to deplete more calories than doing something else. So just recognizing kind of what the session needs are as well.
Yep. It's all like you say, it's all context and then content. So make sure you're fitting in, make sure you're understanding, yourself as an athlete, what your requirements are, what the requirements of the workouts are, what your goals are as well. If you have weight loss goals and other things like that, then being in a little bit of a calorie deficit is probably necessary in order to lose weight. So, you just have to understand that context around things, and then you can fill in the content afterwards. to continue on this line of masters athletes, there was a question that says, true or false, regardless of specific training, genetics may limit performance from getting better in masters athletes. I think, again, the answer is it's context specific.
Sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes.
Yeah, because you were saying earlier, you're like, well, if I get an athlete, doesn't matter if they're a master's athlete or not, and they've never trained before, then they stand to actually gain a lot of fitness. If you've never trained before, then the stress of exercise is going to be so much that you're going to continue to be able to improve your performance for a very, very long time. And I think I'll say this: genetics does play a factor in what your potential is, what your upper ceiling is. But I do not think that people do enough in terms of exercise, nutrition, consistent workouts to actually realize that genetic potential a lot of the time. I think a lot of people are always chasing that genetic potential, and then because they don't get better for some reason, because they're not training enough or they're not managing their stress enough, they just then blame it on genetics, because it's easier to blame a lack of improvement on genetics rather than taking a look and saying, well, what am I doing in terms of my everyday life, my environment, that is actually dictating these changes or not? So I do see how genetics could limit performance, but I don't think a lot of people reach that upper limit of their genetic potential.
There's just certain aspects of movement, of knowledge that individuals pick up on in certain ways. And I still feel, again, like you talked about, if you're not or haven't been exposed greatly to training, your head is so far away from that ceiling that you're going to be continuing to get your head closer and closer to the ceiling from just doing the work itself. Where if somebody really hit a high level of potential younger in life, they're just going to fall a little bit further away from that ceiling. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily see it at that point as being a genetics thing. It's just more of what potential do you have at that point? It's how much potential is sitting in the bag for that individual to gain moving forward. So I look at it more of, if you were an Olympic level swimmer when you were 20, 22 years old and you're now 60, you're probably going to not be able to carry those same times in the pool that you were when you were 20, 22. But if you've never gotten into the water and you're swimming faster than not swimming, and you're swimming further than not swimming, so you're making an improvement. And the more you put yourself into the water, the more likely you are going to get a little bit faster. Now, yes, you might be not swimming at the speed of that ex-Olympic athlete, but you are personally making progress through that development just from the exposure. So I think it becomes more a conversation of potential and how you're working to that potential.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I will say that there are some genetic factors that do go into play in terms of performance. So, for example, your max heart rate is going to come down over time. That is an age-related maximal metric. So heart rate is going to come down over time. That could then reduce your ability for cardiac output, so how much blood you can push around your body. And given that could reduce your VO2 max. However, a lot of these endurance events, like we were talking about, Aaron, during your training camp, are not done at VO2 max. So as long as you have a prerequisitely high VO2 max, all those other factors can still be improved upon and can still help you realize better performance. So I don't want people to be discouraged by some of the discussions that I see about, genetics and this decline after you start aging and other things like that. Be encouraged by the fact that you can get a good coach like Aaron, who's going to sit you down, see what your strengths are, see what your weaknesses are, see what things you can do in order to reach that potential that you have personally. And I guarantee you that by staying consistent, specific, and progressive over time and managing your stress, you will be able to continue to push that performance, whether it's for an Ironman, a half Ironman, really any endurance endeavor that you want, as long as you're able to stay healthy for it. That's a big thing. There was a study done a while ago looking at Paula Radcliffe as she progressed during her marathon times. And for those of you who don't know, she is the former world record holder in the women's marathon. And what they found, they looked at all these predictors of performance, VO2 max, second threshold, efficiency values. And what they found is that her VO2 max actually fell over the time, they started, to take her data to the time that she, kind of retired. Her VO2 max fell, but her efficiency values actually went up. So she was able to improve her efficiency of running over the course of her entire career. And I think it wound up her actually having better performances later in her career than earlier in her career. So, that's somebody who is operating at the very, very highest level, where genetics is definitely going to play a role in terms of the outcomes of the race. And she was still able to get better at different aspects of endurance performance. So be encouraged by those sort of lessons, because that means that, us as, people who aren't training, 120 kilometers, 120 miles a week can still get better, as we get older.
Absolutely. And again, it's just taking advantage of what you got. I mean, sometimes those individuals, from what I had been exposed to last year, I had a couple of 70-year-olds on my roster, and they don't have the same work requirements. They're not working, maybe. They're not having the same stress day to day.
Right.
So there are areas that they're really able to take advantage of, train a little bit more, recover a little bit better. So, I mean, it's just, again, it's just kind of the distribution of training, but also finding the right mix of training that's going to allow you to get better day in and day out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally agree. So here's the last question, and I think we've already touched on it, but how can masters athletes continue to improve their endurance over time? It's, for me, it's, finding a good coach who's going to help you individualize your training, take advantage of the things you can take advantage of, and keep you consistent, keep you, working towards specificity within your training, and then, progressively overloading you to the point that you can bounce back and you can continue to grow. It's same principles, whether you're old or young, and it's all, context specific. How much training have you done in the past? If you've never done high intensity interval training in the past, then maybe that's something that could be beneficial to you, because you stand to gain the most from the things you've done the least. So that's how I would approach things, regardless of if somebody is, older, younger, middle-aged, whatever it is. Aaron, is there anything you want to add, in terms of how you would help to improve really any athlete's endurance over time?
I think it would be more of just an add. I don't disagree with anything that you threw out there, but it's the nutrition, the recovery, and the sleep in that case. That you're going to have different needs nutritionally. We've kind of already talked about this, but you're going to have higher needs for protein. Taking in the right nutrition, taking in clean nutrition, recovering, spending time, maybe mobility work, stability work, strength work, then allowing yourself to recover. These areas, I think, are going to be where the aging athlete can really make some movement on their potential, is trying to maintain that high muscle mass and doing everything in your power to maintain it, then recover from the work that you did to maintain it, and then start it all over again. It's just very, very important to maintain what you got and continue to find ways to be able to wake up and do it all over again.
Yep, that is certainly something. Maintaining motivation over time is a really big one, because I think a lot of us, myself, I'm speaking from experience because this is kind of how I approach it, is I go a little bit too hard during the beginning of my training and other things like that, and then I burn myself out, and then I can't stay consistent. But as you do get older and as you do get more experienced in terms of training, it's not just the training that is going to allow you to make gains. It's exactly like what you were saying, Aaron. It's the nutrition, it's the recovery, it's the quality of your sleep, it's the mobility stuff that you do, it's the strength stuff that you do. It's all of those things that are going to help continue to progress and push you forward.
100%. And
Yep.
If you are a retired individual, this is something where maybe your time is no longer going into work. It's maybe spending some time to figure out these new protocols that are going to make you more efficient, that are going to make you adapt to the expectations. And you'll also probably find that your ADLs, or active daily living activities, get easier as you go too. Whether it's picking up grandkids, whether it's mowing the grass, whether it's just keeping the house clean, whatever it might be, those things are probably going to get easier and easier if you're doing this functionally properly.
Yep, 100% agree. Yeah, those are all really good, just kind of principles for training and continuing to get better as a master's athlete, and as you continue on in your experience as an endurance athlete. But let's switch. This is something that you and I kind of talked about actually during the training camp. But this question is, which blood markers are most important to track, and how often should they be tested? Tough one.
So, Of course, as you go through life, there's going to be different. This becomes a little bit more of a moving target, but I really do. For my athletes, I love to get iron levels. I love to get hematocrit, red blood cells, especially coming from an individual that coaches a lot of low-carb athletes, or I should say right fuel, right time approached athletes. I like to make sure that blood glucose levels fall within a manageable range that I see, because we're also going to create some stability there.
Do you check, if you're reducing carbohydrates a little bit and increasing, fat content within the diet, do you also make sure that their cholesterol levels and blood lipids and other things like that are kind of well within control?
Yes, but I also, there's a little bit of a caveat to that, where when you make, the body, as we find out, does a much better job of regulating this number for most people. And of course, diet can be involved in this, but we're finding out that diet might not have the control that we have thought in the past. So one thing I do like to see is get a baseline before that individual maybe starts to go higher fat. I look 6 to 12 months out. Typically, I do see a rise in cholesterol. And then what I want to see kind of at that 16 to 18 month point is that it comes back to that pre point, which often, and when I say often, almost every single time, it has come back to regulate to those numbers. It's not something where it goes up and stays super, super high. There's just the body is used to kind of filtering through that number. And when more cholesterol is coming in through your diet, that number, it needs to learn how to start to control that new amount of cholesterol coming into the diet. And over time, it does come back into alignment with where it was pre-higher fat diet.
Yeah.
So yes, but I don't often see anything past that point where I've had to say, we've gone down this road, we need to go back, just because it does come back and come regulate itself a lot more. The other thing for an athlete is I really like to see high HDL levels.
Right.
So in the U.S., typically 60 is kind of seen as high or good. I like to see my athletes above 80 in most cases. And really, with the amount of stress that a lot of these athletes are putting in, I want to make sure that that number is higher because their inflammation is going to be a little bit lower. They're going to kind of help some of the joints and ligaments and tissues. So I do look for a little bit of a higher HDL number, and I think that you and I, that's kind of where some of that conversation went to, was where that number is and why I find it to be super, super important for athletes. It's because if it's too low and I'm putting you through a heck of a lot of stress, I would like to see, I have a feeling if it's super low, or if it's low, or if it's even around 60, your potential of soft tissue issues go up. And I think that's part of the conversation that you and I had. And it's like, hey, you know what? This might have some pre-indication of some of the things that you or somebody else might be competing against when that number's not up higher, and you put yourself through a dose of higher intensity or higher stressed workload. So that is another factor that I really, really like to get numbers on and see a good control there. And if not, we can add supplements through omega-3s, or hey, let's pick up your cold water fish, whether it be salmon, whether it be sardines, whether it be, there's a lot of different options that we can do to add. And if you're a vegan style athlete, then we can kind of manipulate that through some seeds, as in flax seeds and chia seeds too. So there's a lot of different ways that we can go and attack low numbers in that case, but it's good to have that number and know, okay, well, this is why I would like to see this number up, and here's how we're gonna move that needle for you.
Yeah, I would also add that the connection between dietary cholesterol and blood cholesterol is pretty much there's a divergent. There's no correlation between how much cholesterol you're eating within your diet. It's more the saturated fats that you are intaking. So that would be really any fats that are solid at room temperature. So animal fats and other things like that. I'm not saying that they're awful. I'm just saying that if you are increasing your fat intake through saturated fats, then you might see an even higher increase in things like your low density lipoproteins, which is your LDL, which is what's, I'll put it in air quotes, your bad cholesterol. But just know that cholesterol, what it's doing is it's kind of the, it's a precursor, or it's a precursor to a lot of hormones first and foremost. So you need enough of it in order to have things like testosterone, for example. But from what how it was explained to me was that cholesterol is like the life rafts that ship and transport fats back and forth. So high density lipoproteins, that HDL, which is the quote unquote good cholesterol, is what is able to actually transport fats from tissues back to your liver for synthesis of things, whereas LDL is the other way. So if you have high LDLs, that's kind of an indication that your life rafts are packing in your adipose tissue a little bit more than what it would be used to. So it makes, so an elevation in terms of cholesterol in general at the beginning of a higher fat, lower carbohydrate diet makes sense because you have more fats on board. That's just what has to happen in response to it. But I like your approach, Aaron, because you look at it 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, so on and so forth, and then it does course correct over time. So I think just getting a regular blood panel is really, really good for most individuals and most athletes over time. I really like to look and make sure that someone's ferritin levels are adequate. And I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think it's somewhere between 30 and 40 as like a baseline, but you probably want it closer to about 50 in order to make sure that you have adequate iron on board in order to resynthesize red blood cells and be able to adequately carry oxygen, because ultimately that's one of the deciding factors in how well you're going to perform on a given day. Do you ever measure vitamin D at all? And does that play any role into your decision making?
I do. Some of that also, that would traditionally have to come from more one of the specialty blood testing organizations, most likely, because it's typically here in the U.S. It must be a little bit more expensive because it's not normal or on a normal blood panel that your PCP would normally recommend. So unless you hit a certain age and then they start to look at it. But I also find that those individuals that might be kind of falling more in the Midwest in the winter that aren't getting a whole heck of a lot of sunlight, or individuals that don't get outside as much and spend some additional time outdoors, it's a good test to know, just so therefore if you have to supplementation for it, it's you can make that adjustment fairly quick. And it is such a valuable and vital vitamin for body regulation.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. But you never know. Like, you don't know your numbers are until you test them. So, it's highly recommended to actually get these tests and, have a coach, primary care physician, sports nutritionist able to give you professional recommendations on it. So I'm not a registered dietitian or anything like that. So before you go taking any supplements after getting a blood test, please consult your physician, sport dietitian, other things like that.
And if I can add to that, recognize you probably want that to get analyzed by somebody that's familiar with not just you, but your classification.
Yeah, and athletics.
Right. If you're an athlete that's putting out 20 to 25 hours of training a week, you don't fall into that normal U.S. individual. So
yes,
if your PCP only sees individuals that maybe are pre-diabetic, have COPD, have all these different lists of precursor or illnesses, that's not necessarily the person that I want looking at and say, okay, your numbers are good. And also when you typically get that sheet from the hospital, or now you probably have it coming online to you, that is just taking the absolute mean of our population and giving you numbers based on those numbers. That is not comparison to an athlete or an individual that might be exercising super, super heavy, hard, or often. So I would really make that recommendation of, if you really want to dive into the numbers and you really want to understand these numbers, there's a number of organizations that do it. I work with athlete blood testing. They do a phenomenal job of diving in and explaining it, and their sample size is from athletes. It's from individuals that you do a questionnaire before. So therefore, when they're analyzing your blood markers, they're actually comparing it against other athletes that are doing your sport, maybe working out the same amount of volume that you're doing, and fall in your age group. So there's often, when you look at just that baseline number, it's really, it's the people that you walk around with on a day-to-day basis, and some of those individuals aren't doing what you're doing. So I would recommend, if you are, depending on who you are and how active you are, try to get that assessed from that same style of eye rather than something that's completely not you, because you're not going to fall in that normal classification at that point.
Yeah, that is something for people to be aware, is if you go to a primary care physician and you do get blood tests done, what they are reporting is the mean, and then I think the standard deviations in terms of, are you within the normal? And if you look at vitamin D especially, the range for normal is massive. It's absolutely massive. So it's really tough to actually say, as an athlete, you need to kind of be a little bit more optimized. So it's really tough to say, oh, even though I fall within normal, am I optimal? So that's where companies like, so you said athlete blood testing. That's the one you work with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. like athlete blood testing will give you a report that gives you comparisons to the individuals within your demographics. So yeah, and then the last thing is how often should you be getting blood draws and testing? And I think you mentioned every 6 months or so is probably a good repeat testing sort of procedure, and it can get expensive if you do it really any more often than that.
Yeah, and also your previous blood sample could also determine I need to do it a little bit sooner as well. Right. I often recommend when you're going through changes of phases in your training, it's always good to get kind of your baseline in the off season. I would want to see kind of your liver enzymes when you're going through a hard phase, whether it be a VO2 max phase or strength phase or threshold phase, because these numbers, typically those liver enzymes are going to be stressed a little bit, and we want to make sure that we're not stressing them too much. So if those numbers are too high, we're creating too much inflammation within our body. So again, there's, depending on the phase, there's also some other parameters that I'm going to look at, but I do feel like anytime that you really change the phase of training, give that a couple of weeks, and then you can get another blood test in that just to see how you're responding to it. But again, if you're just looking to maintain health, the 6, 1, 16, 18, somewhere around that line would be the regulation. But I do recommend everybody get a blood test at least once early, and then start it once a year. Get it once a year, because I've had conversations with 60 or 50-year-old individuals that have not had blood tests, and it's like, well, how do you know something's wrong?
Right.
If you got that first one when you're 17, 18, 20, and then continue to get them throughout your life, that doctor's going to be able, or you and your doctor are going to be able to work together with any kind of adjustments that are negative or positive trends within those blood markers that could not just save your life, but make you more productive too. So there's a lot of important reasons to get this, but I recommend, even no matter how young you are, let's get started and get some numbers, because then that starts to build that foundation. And again, as scientists, what do we like to compare numbers to? Large amounts of data,
Yeah.
So we don't want just that one and done philosophy, because that there's too large of an error rate. So if you have these things going back from when you were 20 years old and you're now 60 or 50, you're going to have a lot of good numbers to compare to. And if something's wrong, there's going to be an opportunity to hop in and start doing more tests to find out, this might have just saved my life.
Yeah, 100% agree. So we got a couple minutes left, and I want to do one more question, and then we'll make this a 2-part episode. So what is the best home test protocol for individuals with just a power meter and a heart rate monitor? So I'll play devil's advocate here and say that if an individual had just a power meter and just a heart rate monitor, I would not necessarily recommend doing really any testing protocol. You could do what I would recommend is I would recommend doing workouts that you think are close to zone 2, doing workouts that you think are pretty close to your threshold. So you could do maybe an FTP test or something like that, but you could also do other tests or other workouts that are 8 minutes on, 2 minutes off, repeated over time. And then you could do VO2 max work. And then what you would do is you would measure your power and your heart rate over time. And you would come to conclusions of, when I'm giving this effort, this heart rate is normal, or this power output is normal. When I'm giving a threshold effort, this power output is normal, this heart rate is normal. When I do my performances, this power output is normal, this heart rate is normal. So then over time, you can slowly hone in on, the actual training intensities and the heart rates that are, most indicative of those sort of styles of training. Obviously, you got to get there somewhere. So now I said I was going to play devil's advocate. Now I'm going to backpedal a little bit. So I think at the very least, the best, like the simplest place to start is doing something like a 20 to 30 minute FTP test, and then loosely basing your, zoning parameters off of the results of that FTP test, and then continually doing an FTP test over time. There's a lot of different ways to go about it. Aaron, how would you actually go about it?
So, probably knowing our viewers and followers, I will say that your first devil's advocate answer might be the most productive way to do it, but I don't think a lot of athletes want to hear that. They're not going to go through that process, which is probably why you gave the other side of that.
Yeah.
I am going to take it from just a slightly different answer, and I would want to get a couple of different tests. So first off, what style of training are you looking to do right now? So if you're looking to do a lot of short, high-intensity efforts, I don't think us getting a 30-minute test is going to be the ideal test for you, because you're going to be doing shorter efforts. So I almost look at somewhat of a ramp test being better for that individual, because I feel like they're going to get a little bit more specific numbers to that short, spiky, high-intensity effort. The individual that is looking to do more somewhat, let's say, steady state or more just anaerobic duration, I would say, okay, well, then that 20 or 30-minute FTP test would be a better way to go for you, because it's going to give us more, because you're trying to work towards 10, 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes of consistent steady state power or slightly above that. This is going to give us a little bit more of a targeted number to find where that number is. Also, I really, for the individual that's doing more zone 2 work, I do like the math test model, where you have a good warm-up, you have your heart rate, and you're coming out, and even if you use the Phil Maffetone model where you're taking 180 minus your age, there are some plus and minuses on that formula that can adjust it. I don't want to go into that detail, so I'm just going to keep it super simplistic and say 180 minus your age, keeping your heart rate under that ceiling for a 30-minute test. And what you're going to try to do is get a good warm-up, 15, 20, 30 minutes, and then come in and hold that heart rate for that 30-minute period of time. Then what we want to do is you'll want to have two different power meter sources, because you're going to want one of those power meter sources, or you want one of those collection data to give you the average of your 30 minutes. You, of course, want the other one to kind of run the entire length of the workout so you have that fully captured. But getting that 30 minutes of MAF effort, so maximum aerobic function is what that MAF means. It's not Phil Maffetone's specific thing. So capturing that 30 minutes under that ceilinged heart rate, getting that average, and then coming back, and I like to see individuals hold that for 3 by 8 minutes at the power. And then what I analyze is how much heart rate drift that you have in that 3 by 8 minute session. If I don't see any heart rate drift, we're in a good place. If we see some heart rate drift, we would move that number down in that zone 2 level by 5 to 10% based on how significant that heart rate drift was through those 3 by 8 minutes efforts. So this is how I would handle somebody that's looking to do more zone 2. Now, if you're looking to do a little bit of everything, sprinkle in the salt, the pepper, and whatever other spices that you want to do, then I would do a collection of all of those things. So the reason why and yes, that might get you a completely different FTP across all those different types of workouts, but you're going to get good specific work in each one of those efforts. And I feel like that is the most important thing. It doesn't, yeah, you can brag which one's higher with your buddies, but in the grand scheme of things, it's still about you moving the needle and being better. And if we have multiple parameters between each of these style of workouts, you're going to end up moving the needle on each one of those specific style of workouts much, much more effectively. And that's why I like to span it across a couple of different methods or thoughts, because I think it gives you a little bit of a better targeted number. Because I can tell you, I work with a lot of different athletes, and whether they're really keen on high intensity workout or the aerobic engines or whatever it might be, their FTP does not translate or correlate across all different types of workouts that I'm throwing at them. So I want to make sure that we are finding that right point for that elicitation of what we're looking to get from that workout, and then make sure that that ends up moving the needle for that athlete. So I know that was probably a long-winded answer to that question, but I feel if you're looking to get the best out of yourself, that is the way to do it.
I am going to change my answer to Aaron's answer. That was very, very well said, sir. Yes. So just to summarize, do something along the lines of estimating your zone 2, whether that's the Maffetone method, the 5% method that I've talked about on the podcast from Uphill Athlete. If you're trying to do more threshold work, do something similar to, 30-minute FTP sort of style test, because that's going to give you a little bit more of that threshold specific power output. And if you're trying to do more VO2 max, higher intensity punchy stuff, do 1 minute, a ramp test that includes 1 minute of increasingly harder and harder loads until failure. And then that's going to give you your maximal heart rate and your maximal power output. And then those are all going to be really, really good starting points for doing zone 2 training, threshold training, and VO2 max training. So yes, that was a phenomenal answer. That was really, really good. We still have more questions to actually answer, but we are out of time. So I am going to delay the answering of the next questions until the next episode. In the meantime, I will reach back out to people on Instagram, and if you have more questions, as always, you can find me on Instagram, DM me. You can find Aaron on Instagram at @Geiser. He's been a lot more involved in the Instagram game as of late, which is awesome. Been engaging a lot of people, and
Hello,
you guys,
world.
hello world, and you. No, it's so funny because no one else is going to understand that other than me, you, Meg, and Aaron. So you can also comment down below, and if you're on Spotify, you can also ask questions within the Spotify app itself. So don't be shy. Ask away. Ask questions. We'll do our best to answer them on the podcast, or answer them in a way on our social medias. Yeah, so this is the start of season 2. I'm really excited for where the podcast is going and everything. So if you guys have any other feedback or anything like that, please let us know, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.